The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show, the Friday bonus show. News from Italy, where Prime Minister Matteo Renzi is set to resign after suffering a major defeat in a referendum over constitutional reform. And what is happening in Europe is both fascinating, but also sort of jarring and scary. The Eurozone's third largest economy, which is Italy, is now going to be heading into political turmoil. There's a lot going on in Europe that really warrants significant discussion, and we've had some of that discussion on the broadcast show, the regular show. Of course, we've tracked the rise of right-wing nationalist parties in Europe. We've talked about everything from Greece to France to Belgium and Finland, et cetera, et cetera. And the rise of right-wing nationalism in Europe is a major, major concern. Additionally, with the election of President-elect Donald Trump, we have to be considering how the relationship between the United States and Europe, if Donald Trump goes through with some of the stick rather than carrot approaches to the economy and trade, tariffs and taxation and on import-export, that could significantly impact our relationship with Europe. And I think that there's this false idea in many sort of more isolationist, conservatively minded Americans that it doesn't matter what happens in Europe. It doesn't matter what Europe does. It doesn't matter what our relationship with Europe is, that this is the United States and it's just absolutely fine. And to the extent that most manufacturing of American products is not done in Europe, it's done in Central America and it's done in Asia, it is sort of true that there is some separation in terms of the American economy from the European economy. But what seems to be missing for so many of the Trumpists is that because of the similar sort of Western economic status quo of a number of European economies in the United States, the United Kingdom, for example, and France, another example, many, many European countries, if things start to go poorly in Europe, that is going to have an effect on the perceived stability of the American economy. And we know that much of the truth of the stability of an economy is based on the perception of the stability of that economy. So I think it's very short-sighted, Pat, when these Trumpists say, I don't care what happens in Europe, we don't care about Europe, those Frenchies and blah, 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 communists. It actually does matter what happens in Europe. And it's so hard to get a Trumpist, an isolationist Trumpist particularly, to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to the fact that globalism is the narrative that we have now and have had for the past few decades. You can't isolate as much now, especially because our economy is dependent on other economies and it all works as one.
And this relates also to Donald Trump's threats of starting trade wars with China or with Mexico or with whoever else. The idea that we just decide what we do with no potentially negative repercussions from those decisions, it's just so bogus, and it's such an infantile way of thinking about the economy. Additionally, now, with the upcoming resignation of the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, the next, I would say, 18 months, the first year plus of the Donald Trump administration is going to tell us a lot about what we can expect in terms of relationships with other countries. And this doesn't even begin, we've talked about this many times, it's really embarrassing for many in the United States that Donald Trump is going to be the next president. And other countries sort of notice that. And that's actually the next story, which is that China has been increasingly mocking Donald Trump, Chinese media, for, quote, running the country with Twitter. Trump very aggressively threatening China in a number of different ways economically. And the Chinese media is really having a field day. And it is embarrassing to have a president-elect that does what Trump does. And I think that there's no question that the policy concerns we've talked about are very significant. But the fact that Trump is just embarrassing us is not without consequence. This will impact the perception of world leaders' willingness to work with the United States when they see Trump tweeting unhinged at 4 a.m. That has an impact.
Well, I think also his meeting or speaking over the phone with the president of Taiwan also angered them in recent days, and their whole public media outlets have been railing against him.
Yeah, the Trump-Taiwan thing that we talked about earlier this week, I get the sense that if Donald Trump has been told that he may want to scale back some of the China stuff, that he isn't taking it seriously. And it seems not to have gotten as a message to many of his surrogates. A couple days ago, I was watching on CNN There's this former Navy SEAL Trump supporter. I forget the guy's name, but he's been appearing regularly in media on CNN. I think I've only seen him on CNN. Who was asked about the entire China thing, and he gave this totally misplaced and inaccurate rant about how it's irrelevant what China does and that the United States economy has a much larger capacity to bear economic downturns than does the Chinese economy. And I sort of don't agree at all with that. China has way more people than the United States. China's growth rate has exceeded that of the United States for some time now. And I think it's totally wrong to think that it doesn't matter if what Trump does hurts the U.S. and China in the short term, because the U.S. can bear it in a greater way than China can. Increasingly, China, I think, Pat, is the one that actually can bear economic problems more than the U.S., particularly when you consider that China owns a ton of U.S. debt.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very naive way to look at things. And even though you may have disagreements, and we have many with the Chinese government,
sure,
there's a more diplomatic way to approach those differences than just to go after them on Twitter.
Well, Trump lacks all diplomatic knowledge, and that's why it's increasingly concerning, as I mentioned earlier this week, that so many former military members are being considered for Trump's cabinet. Because when you have a guy with no diplomatic experience, and by and large, the voices in his head when it comes to national security and foreign policy are former military. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And when all you have is former military perspectives, or when what you mostly have is former military perspectives, the solutions are all going to look like military solutions. And that is a major, major problem. I do also want to talk about Finland for a second. You might remember, I think it was probably a year and a half to 2 years ago that I told you about how Finland deals with childbirth and infant mortality and early parenting. And you may know that the United States is, of course, a first world country, but has a worse infant mortality rate than some second and third world countries. So the rate of babies dying before their first birthday is higher in the United States than in any other developed or so-called first world country. And if you look at some specific cities in the United States, it's really bad. Detroit, for example, in Detroit, a baby is less likely to live to see its first birthday than if it was born in Lebanon, Bosnia, or Mexico, all three countries with pretty high infant mortality rates. And this has led the health commissioner of Detroit to think outside the box. And a box is exactly what helped Finland keep infant mortality low. They have these baby boxes. They are cardboard boxes. They're filled with important baby products, like, for example, blankets, diapers, tear-free, hypoallergenic bath soap. But they also have a mattress pad so that they can serve as a functional crib. These are called maternity packages in Finland. Every single new mother since 1938 in Finland has received one of these baby boxes, and health experts who have looked at why Finland has such a low infant mortality rate point to these boxes. And it's relevant in a number of ways. Number one, when babies don't have a crib, it's much more likely that they're going to end up getting hurt because, number one, they may be sleeping in the parent's bed where there is rollover risk, or two, they may be sleeping somewhere that is not self-contained, and it may be too high for a baby to be safely sleeping in, and babies can roll off and get hurt. So sort of from a logistical side, it's very obvious why these baby boxes are useful. Number two, if you provide a starter pack, so to speak, of the basic needs that a baby has, it's much more likely to also serve as an educational tool for the parents that, hey, these are the things we've started with. We need to keep buying this stuff, even if it's financially difficult or otherwise there are obstacles towards it. So this is something that now Detroit is going to adopt. I don't think it would be any surprise, Pat, if in 5 years we look at this and we see that infant mortality has been drastically reduced in Detroit. This is a great idea.
Yeah, my sister actually recently had her first child, and when I went to visit them at the hospital, there were signs all over the place saying that you can't let the baby sleep on the bed with you. And that just seems so obvious.
Particularly when you think about hospital beds, which are, it's not a king size bed exactly, and it would be much, much easier for that to happen. So I think that this is a really, really great idea. And It's so obvious that we have so much to learn from what Scandinavian countries are doing. And it doesn't mean we can or should do everything that they do. But when you look at the status quo in Detroit, and you look very specifically at this program that dates back to 1938 in Finland and what they've been able to do, it's very, very clear that this is a really good thing. And I think that there should be no shame or stigma whatsoever associated with doing things that are being done in Scandinavia. What's that phrase? A plagiarism is the sincerest form of flattery or something like that.
I'm not even sure.
I think
no.
it goes, I might be butchering it. It's something like that. Finland did something really great, and we shouldn't be ashamed of the fact that we're going to be mirroring it. And I look forward to seeing what the results are in Detroit as far as this initiative goes. The fundraiser is on davidpakman.com/donate. We are doing it. We are making it happen. We are expanding the influence and reach of independent progressive media. And I hope you'll check out the campaign at davidpakman.com/donate. Make those contributions. Very, very exciting.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.